30 years ago. Last month I started in fashion, and that was when I started my brand Patch Cootie, which means world upside down in the Quechua language. And initially that was supposed to be a summer holiday project before starting a PhD in natural dyes and the symbolism of colour in the Andes. And very soon, by the time it got September, I could really see the difference that fair trade purchasing was making to the communities I was working with. And I mean, I started my sort of based on the principles of fair trade from the very outset. People often say, well, when did you start to bring in fair trade and sustainability? It's like, well, it was there from the beginning. I wouldn't have started a fashion brand without that. I think I was the first person to put the words fair trade and fashion together, because at the time fair trade was some really undrinkable Nicaraguan coffee, and that was it. So yes, I mean that's when I started my brand, and Patch Cootie became really well known. We pioneered the traceability and transparency in fashion supply chains. We became the first company in the world to be fair trade certified by the World Fair Trade Organization, and piloted 2 of the certification systems. But also we were a pilot for the European Union's Geo Fair Trade project, the only kind of non-commodity pilots. The rest of them were all sort of foodstuffs. So we sort of traced our supply chains back to the each weaver's house, sort of high up in the Andes, to the processing facilities, to where the raw materials grew, and we collected 69 different sort of social, economic, environmental indicators across 3 years. So this gave us a really clear picture as to what our impact was. We knew how much water each hat used, we knew the energy use for each hat. We could compare it to a conventional cotton hat, for instance. We knew how amazing the Colodovica palmata raw material was. But we could also see our fair trade impact, looking into everything from how many of the producers' children went to school, looking at sort of medical healthcare, sort of different indicators. So I kind of felt like I'd been banging on about transparency for a really long time, because I knew how essential it was for showing the impact on producers and on the environment. And when the Rana Plaza factory collapsed in Bangladesh, it was just really clear to me that there was no transparency. And it's kind of indicative of the lack of interest people had shown, both brands that Patch Cootie supplied and the press that we tried to talk to about the transparency projects. And suddenly people started to realise why transparency was important.
And fashion revolution's come such a long way since then. Well done on your contribution there. Do you feel like it's having impact?
It certainly is having impact. I mean, fashion revolution works very much across the sort of citizens' education and awareness raising. We look at the industry, so we carry out really groundbreaking research, like our fashion transparency index. We're doing more in-depth research into emissions at the moment. We're looking at research into sort of the tier 2, looking at the ginning and the spinning in the Tamil Nadu area of India, and this is really having an impact on brands' behaviour. And then we also work with policymakers, particularly in the European Union, and we've just launched a European Citizens Initiative, which was accepted last week by the European Commission or by the European Union, into living wages for garment workers throughout the fashion supply chain. So really exciting to see the sort of the policy work we're doing, because we know that really can make a huge difference to the lives of millions of people.
And how are you able to fund that? Is it largely volunteer driven, or have you got financial support from institutions or groups?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly need a lot more funding. We do have some funders, mostly institutional donors, sort of few reasonably sized grants, but nowhere near enough for an organisation. And for what we want to do, it's very difficult, and especially after leaving Europe, it means we're not eligible for the European Union funding, which did traditionally provide a lot of our funds. We do have country teams registered in different countries around the world now, so yes, a lot of it is run by volunteers around the world, but we do also have many registered offices who are now able to raise their own funds as well.
So I'm interested in your your citizen science work. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of those projects?
Yes, I mean, we have a really exciting project working at the moment, which is really punching above its weight in terms of impact and the coverage it's receiving. So it's a small project with Keele University, also with researchers from Loughborough University, and we're carrying out citizen science and social science into the impacts of the textile industry here in Leek, where we're sitting now, and in the village of Rudyard, where I live. So we're looking at the historic textile production. We're looking at the pollution in the sediment, in the mud of the lake. So we've been out on a boat taking sediment cores, going back into the lake. We've been collecting water from the rivers, which can show us, what textile pollution is present today. And we know how much comes off of our clothes. As part of the project, the researchers washed and dried just 8 lab coats. These were the polyester cotton blends, and they got 5 milliliters of microfibers off of them. 8 lab coats in one wash and dry cycle. And it was really quite shocking when we went on a Monday, so late morning, with the BBC down to the river, and we took some water samples. The amount of fibres in the water were incredible, and a lot of these will be from sort of outward venting tumble dryers over the weekend. They will also be from washing, and that's gone down into the system. It's been held in the water treatment plants quite often for maybe 24 hours, and then it's been released again. But a lot of those fibres don't get captured by the waste treatment plants. So really interesting to see people engaging, because once you start to see the problem, you understand, and once you start to understand, you can do something about it. So we really hope we can run more citizen science projects, not just here in Staffordshire, but rolling this out around the world if we can get funding.
But what can people do about that, particularly about the fibres that are emerging from the cloth?
You can choose your materials more wisely, so try to go for sort of things like hemp, linen, organic cotton. Try to minimise the coatings, so try not to have things which are stain resistant, easy care, particularly school uniforms. All the things that makes it particularly easy for parents to care for are actually a lot of those are caused by those harmful chemicals. But all of us have power as citizens to bring about change. So sort of 15,000 different chemicals are used to make textiles and clothing, and only 21% of brands are disclosing any information about which toxic substances are prohibited in their manufacturing process. So we can ask those brands we love, what's in my clothes, and we can demand regulation from policymakers, because really publishing your manufacturing restricted substances list, that should be required by law, so we know what chemicals are going into our waterways, into our seas, affecting human health, affecting our endocrine system, affecting our fertility rates dropping 1% a year globally. And we know a lot of this is due to those chemicals, and a lot of those chemicals are found in our clothing.
And I know that you have recently done quite a lot of work in natural colour as well at the Chelsea Flower Show. Can you tell us something about that?
Yes, I mean, I've been going to Chelsea Flower Show for a decade or more with Patrick Cootie before I handed the fashion brand over to my husband to run back in, that was about 2014, he took it over. But I remember saying to him, I'd often go down there, and I just remember talking about, well, wouldn't it be amazing to have a textile garden here at Chelsea? And then I was approached last summer by Lottie Delamain, who's a garden designer who got through the first round of judging for a new category at Chelsea Flower Show, sponsored by Project Giving Back. So we then worked through the next few rounds of judging and got our garden accepted. And a textile garden for Fashion Revolution was at Chelsea Flower Show just a couple of weeks ago, so showcasing all of the plants that can be used to make our clothes. We only use native varieties, so there was no sort of indigo and things like that on the garden. So we had those traditional plants like woad, weld, madder, but we also had plants like we had nettles, we had foxgloves, we had cow parsley, and so many different plants that we can literally find on the banks and the hedgerows all around us that can be used to make our clothes. So it's really just, trying to sow that seed of curiosity, making people think more creatively about their old bed sheets as well as their clothing, and what can be done, from plants which are readily available.
And I guess in Leek we've got a lot of textile heritage here. What's the model for sort of bringing some of that, or localising in future? What could happen?
Yes, I mean, where we are in Leek, it was a real centre of the textile and dye industry. William Morris came here, he spent about 4 years here on and off working with the Wardles, and the River Churnet here was known for the purity and the softness of its water, and it became the most polluted river in the whole of Europe, and this is a problem that we have exported elsewhere around the world. But there are solutions to this. I mean, one of them is some friends of mine. They've set up a company called Galley, and they're working on lab-grown cotton, which is an incredible initiative. I met the founder at a party in New York probably 4 years ago, and literally I wouldn't let him leave. I was so excited about him. I think I talked to him all evening, but I couldn't talk about it for about 2 years because it was so top secret. But lab-grown cotton can be grown anywhere in the world. So it could be grown right next to the spinning, the processing mills. So all of that processing could be done in one place. It means we could be growing and processing and making clothes here in the UK. It's, if you think about things like, you've heard about lab-grown beef. The whole idea is you're taking it from the seed to the cotton without that sort of in-between process. So there's like 90% less water use, and that the water is used is then recycled. It doesn't, you don't use GM varieties. It can be organic cotton. You can use those heritage, those amazing indigenous varieties we see in places like Mexico and Peru, those naturally coloured cottons as well. So I think, really exciting innovations that we're going to be seeing more of, hopefully very soon. We just need some investment in them.
And can we talk now about your own personal approach to clothing? What are some of the strategies you use to minimise your impact?
Gosh, I don't wash my clothes very much at all, and if I do, I make sure I wash on really short cycles, 20-minute cycle, and line dry as much as possible. So really conscious of how much I'm washing. I do a lot of repairing. The dress I'm wearing at the moment has like new panels sewn up the back in yellow. It's got patches on the side which are pretty invisible, I think. But yeah, and I buy a lot second-hand and vintage as well, so I love going to vintage fairs. Love going to buying on places like Vestio and eBay. But I mean, fundamentally I actually don't buy many clothes. I have a really small wardrobe, and I share a lot with my daughter. I borrow her clothes and she'll borrow mine as well, more frequently that way around. So yeah, no, that's the way, and swap clothes with friends as well. So yes, I think I've always bought from jumble sales, from charity shops, from vintage stores. That's been very much a part of my ethos, from growing up as a teenager with no money.
And what about the wellbeing benefits of those actions, of being more creative in the way that you're choosing and using clothes? Is there a benefit in that we've got our own energy there, and it makes it more meaningful than just buying at the press of a button?
It definitely does. I mean, that means that those clothes have got stories. If it's something that's been ripped and repaired, you can remember that you were at a festival dancing away and you caught the hem of your dress. I mean, my husband, we had an indigo vat going this weekend. My daughter was back and dyed some jeans. My husband did some amazing sort of dip-dyed, tie-dyed shirts and t-shirts, and absolutely loved them. I know he's going to be wearing them, but also telling the stories of how as a family we got together and we were using the indigo vat and creating these textiles together. So I think it's got a lot more meaning than just going into one of the fast fashion high street stores and saying, oh, that looks nice, like a nice pattern. So it's something you've created and you've been a part of that manufacturing process.
And how do you think we can create change? Because there's been a lot of conversation, and people who are aware are making a difference, but clearly there are a lot that perhaps either aren't aware or don't want to know? What do you think can shift attitudes more and more quickly?
Interesting. I mean, I've been talking to press today about Love Island and the Love Island collaboration with eBay, and we do have influencers there who still do make a huge impression on many 16 to 24-year-olds. They will be looking at what they're wearing, and whether we like it or not, they do look up to them and want to imitate them and emulate them. So for the first time, the Love Islanders are able to wear their own clothing, so they can actually bring clothing from their own wardrobes, and they can, when people look at their clothing, they will be shown second-hand options from eBay in this eBay collaboration as well. And I think actually what's more important is what happens at the end. How do these influencers behave once they finish? Are they going to go off like Molly May and start working with Pretty Little Thing, or are they actually going to use their power and say, well, look, no, we're not going to have work on a collaboration or be an influencer for a fast fashion brand, or do like Brett, I'm not going to remember his name, who was working part of a campaign, a protest with Venetia Lamanna down in London at the Molly May show in February, protesting and saying we should have living wage for garment workers who are making these clothes. So these influencers do have a lot of power. They're really influential with the young people. They just need to be using it in the right way. So I'm hoping that this is the start of a deeper conscience, and it's not just something which is happening for the TV programme.
Anything else that is worth throwing in there that we haven't discussed? What else could be happening in this space to reduce the impact?
Well, I think the main thing I want to say is that all of us do have the power to affect change. I think often it feels like it's a really big, and it is a big problem, but sometimes it just feels like we're powerless. What difference will it make if we contact the brand? Whereas from our conversations with the biggest fashion brands in the world, we know that it usually only takes between about 50 and 200 emails to them on a certain topic for that to get discussed at board level. That's how seriously they take it. And I know that I was told by an industry insider that for every one person asking the question, who made my clothes, the brands took that as representing 10,000 people who thought the same way, but didn't, couldn't be bothered to do anything about it. So we do have power, and brands really are listening to their customers. So use that power, and whether it's in a shop, ask the shop assistant. If you're going in to buy new trainers, go in and say, which is your most sustainable sneaker brand, trainer brand. Ask those questions. Do you have a sustainable viscose policy? If they don't know, see if they can go and find out, because the more people get asked the questions, the more they'll say to their managers, well, I was asked this today, and somebody else will say, oh yes, I was asked something similar last week, and they'll start to demand that information, and brands will start to disclose more, and that's the very first step towards change.
That's important, but ultimately, really, we need to be using a lot less, don't we? Like, it's good if brands are doing the right thing, but volume is a key issue.
Yeah, no, volume is a really key issue, and I would add to that, circularity. We need textile to textile recycling as well, so that the clothes that we are producing get turned into new fibres, because a lot of the clothes are very disposable, they're very trend-led, and they aren't going to be clothes, yes, they might have a life in a charity shop, but they're not going to last, or they're not going to be fashionable in 6 months' time, probably even a month's time for many of them. So we do need brands to be designing for circularity, and we do need brands to be investing in fibre to fibre recycling, so that those textiles are made into new textiles, really, and we're working within more of a closed loop system.
And just getting back to your own wardrobe again, can we talk about the health and wellbeing benefits of being more connected to your clothes? And you mentioned that you've mended your dress. Do you get satisfaction and enjoyment out of doing that beyond the mere extending the life of clothes?
A little bit. I wouldn't say I'm a particular mending addict. I mean, some people do. I do a lot of darning of socks and wool tights and things, and it is more a bit like, oh gosh, there's another hole, let's see how we can do it quickly. I mean, I have got some lovely sort of alpaca from the endery, which does make it much more enjoyable when you've got some lovely colours and some good yarns to use as well. But I'm not somebody who loves mending. I do it because I want to, and because I think it's the right thing to do.